Hi, my name is Lissa, and I am here today to talk about the children's novel, How to Train Your Dragon by Cressida Cowell. This book was written or published in 2003, so it takes place in the current golden age of children's literature. It is a fantasy novel, and despite the title, it has no similarities to the movie. Well, it has very few similarities to the movie. This book is about a young boy, Hiccup, and his dragon, Toothless. In the book, Toothless is a very small dragon with no teeth, a very average breed. And this book focuses on Hiccup's journey of training Toothless using unconventional methods, as the main method is to yell at the dragon, but Hiccup knows that this won't work for him. He's not a very good yeller. This book follows the journey of him and a few other boys and their training of the dragons, and how ultimately at their initiation ceremony, where they're supposed to prove their control over the dragons, the boys fail. And they're supposed to be banished. Only the next day they help to get rid of two mountain-sized dragons that had shown up. Thanks to Hiccup's plan, they're able to destroy the dragons, and thanks to Toothless, Hiccup is able to survive. Now, I'm going to talk mostly about socio-cultural theoretic framework. I'll be talking about sexism and race and all that good stuff. Now, as a children reading a book, it can have a big influence on kids. I remember when I was a kid, a lot of the novels I read had a big impact on me. A lot of the books I read taught me to care about animals and to care about kids. What I didn't notice growing up was a lot of race representation in books, and unfortunately, How to Train Your Dragon doesn't include much race representation either. Right from the beginning of this book, I was able to see the lack of representation. Before the book even begins, we see this illustration, and here you can see there's only one boy of color illustrated. Now, some may say, well, at least there's one boy, like, at least it's not no boys. But throughout the rest of the book, all the other pictures are of seemingly white characters. That's the only illustration of a boy of color. There's also no mention of race throughout the whole book. That is the only indication of race that we get in the novel. Now, I read I Am Not Beyoncé, Tackling the Issue of Race Representation Head On by Zetta Elliott. And in this article, she talks about this study that was done about representation in novels. And she sums it up and states that it reveals that animals and inanimate objects are better represented in children's literature than Native American children and kids of color. Unfortunately, How to Train Your Dragon kind of proves this right. There is more representation of different kinds of dragons and even of sheep than there are kids of color in this book. So what is this saying to the young reader? It's saying that the world's not diverse, which is very, very untrue. We live in a very diverse world. And so by limiting the representation of race in this novel, we're kind of limiting the view of children on the world as being diverse, which is very sad. Now, I'm not saying this book is racist, because it's not. It doesn't say anything negative about people of color. It just doesn't really say anything about people of color. Now, the same in this book can be said of females. This book starts off from the very first page, which is actually technically page 2, yay numbering. It starts out, 10 boys, including Hiccup, were hoping to become full members of the tribe by passing the dragon initiation program. Now, what's wrong with that sentence? 10 boys. Where are the girls? Where are the female dragon trainers? There are none. Throughout the whole book, we only get mention of 2 females. We get Hiccup's mother, and then somebody's cousin gets named. But there is a very prominent lack of female presence in this novel. Now, the article, Sexism in Children's Literature, by Wilma J. Pyle, is all about the lack of representation, and more so about what the representation that is given says about the characters. And Wilma Pyle asks, were girls being exposed in their reading to ideas which encouraged them to think of themselves as persons able to work outside the home in areas other than secretaries, nurses, teachers, waitresses, or household help? So when we ask that question in regards to how to train your dragon, what's the answer? Well, there kind of is no answer, because we don't really get any female presence that's strong enough to answer that question. We only get brief mentions of the female. So what's that saying to our young girls, our young female readers? It's saying that they can't train dragons, because there's no proof that they can. Only boys are training dragons. Only boys are saving the day. There's no girl riding a dragon. There's no girl training a dragon, which is very sad. Now, this book is by a female author, and so I would have thought that there would be more female presence. Now, I will say this is the first novel in a series, so I have not read the rest of the series. I hope that in later books there would be more female representation. Also, just like with race, this book is not necessarily sexist, because we don't get enough female presence for it to really say anything negative about them. If anything, I mean, the limited interaction we get with Hiccup's mother kind of shows her as being very strong, almost manly woman. Which isn't pro-feminism, but it's not sexist. We just don't really get enough to know. Now, Hiccup himself is a very interesting character. He is kind of considered a sissy boy. He's weak, he's small, he doesn't go the traditional route of yelling at his dragon to train it. He tries to find alternative methods. Now, these alternative methods he uses on his dragon could be easily considered mothering. Right from the get-go, when he gets his dragon, the first night, he allows it to crawl into his bed and cuddle with him. This is on page 80. Before that, he asks his father, he's like, Toothless is so small and, I'm afraid the other dragons will beat him up. Can he just sleep in my room tonight? And his big manly dad is like, no, he cannot. He's a dragon. It'll be good for him. He's got to stay out here with the other dragons. And Hiccup's like, okay. And then smuggles him into his room to protect him from the other dragons. Now that's a pretty mothering quality. He wants to protect his young, weak dragon. He wants to keep him from being bullied by the others or being killed. And what does that say about Hiccup? That kind of gives him a little bit of a feminine connotation, especially in opposition to the rest of the men of the tribe that are, throw him in with the other dragons. It's okay. Now, Hiccup also goes out of his way to try to get the dragon to like him. On page 84 to 85, he spends a whole bunch of effort to make Toothless a mud bath to try to get him to like him better. And then on page 95, he tries to bribe Toothless with lobsters. Instead of asserting his dominance and yelling at the dragon, he tries to get the dragon to like him. Again, this is more thought of to be a feminine quality than a masculine quality, which I disagree with, but stereotypically, masculine training method in this book would be yelling, while a more feminine approach is getting him to like you and manipulating him that way. Not manipulating, but getting him to like you, to listen to you, respect you. Now, very interesting article, Sissy Boy Mothering Male-Child Mother Figures in Middle Grade Fantasy Literature by Danielle Bray. This article, Danielle Bray talks about two other novels that the main male character, kind of takes a mothering figure. And she talks primarily about how their mothering is kind of shown through their procurement of food and feeding of the other characters, because that's considered a mothering thing to do, is to feed your offspring. It starts from birth when mothers breastfeed and then progresses. Now, Hiccup does this a little bit. He feeds his dragon a little bit on page 95, tries to bribe him with food. And Danielle Bray, she sums up this article by saying, revising our definition of non-sexist work to include an understanding boy characters both hegemonic and gender atypical, and to value the diverse contributions made by characters whose gender expressions are likewise diverse, can help to liberate our cultural stereotypes about boys and girls, creating a context in which we can celebrate people for the gestures they perform without regard to the type of person we think should be performing the act. I love this statement, and I think Hiccup embodies it. He goes outside the gender norms, and in the end, he's the one that saves the day. He uses his out-of-the-box thinking and rescues the whole village. And that way, I think this book is great for kids. It takes a boy who's not manly and kind of runtish, and his dragon that's definitely a runt, and it shows the world that they can be just as great as, or even better, than the stereotypical manly types. You can break the gender norm and be just as great as those that can't. In that way, I think this book is great for children. I think it shows them that you don't have to fit within a specific gender norm. This book may be lacking diversity, and it may be lacking a feminine presence, but I think it breaks the male stereotype, and I think that is fantastic. I wish it did have more representation, but you can't have everything. Maybe in further novels there is more representation, and maybe I'll continue reading them to find out. That is all I have to say for now on How to Train Your Dragon by Cressida Cowell. It's a great book. It has lots to talk about. I hope you all read it. Thank you.